Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Calling the Real You podcast. I'm your host, Pamela Horton, and today we are talking with Shannon Graham. Shannon has actually been with us before, and his interview was just very exciting that I decided to invite him back, and thankfully he agreed to appear with us. And we are going to be talking about, using one's imagination and personal patterns of excellence. And for those of you who are just joining us and did not have an opportunity to join us on our first interview with Shannon, Shannon is the founder of the Legacy Program, which is an intensive coaching program that helps visionary leaders change the world by doing the impossible. And I love that. Shannon, welcome to Calling the Real You.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we got into a really interesting conversation the last time that we shared time together, and you had just started to touch upon the topic of using one's imagination and personal patterns of excellence, and I thought that it would be great to have you back. And before we dive into that specific topic, could you just share a few moments with us right now about how did you get from point A to point B and the success that you're having today? Who are you? What's your experience?
I'll try to give you the bullet-pointed version here. The truth is I've just always had a fascination with people. And my fascination has been, what's the difference between someone who operates at a high level and someone who gets what they want out of life and someone who doesn't? And I've realized that there's not that much difference between people in general and the people who get what they want and make an impact on the world, and the people who don't have a couple differences that are pretty major. And that was fascinating to me because it's not genetic. These are things that people can learn. So I was fascinated by that because what it meant to me is that anybody can take themselves and their life to a new level of excellence if they are willing to apply certain tools, certain strategies, certain mindsets. And so I became obsessed about what are those tools, what are those mindsets, and how can I apply them to my own life, because I had a period in my life where I was kind of in more of a dark phase, I'd say, with drugs and alcohol and crime. And luckily I had the foresight to know that path wasn't going to take me to a very excellent destination. And so I was fascinated by these things, honestly, initially out of self-preservation. And kind of like when you see a good movie, I began to experience great results from these strategies and these mindsets. And so just naturally, you want to share them. When you see a great movie, you want to share it. So I started sharing these ideas and these strategies and mindsets with other people, and I started to see their lives benefit. And the fulfillment that I got from seeing other people's lives improve was something I had never experienced before. And I was just hooked. So that was really the beginning. I started my coaching practice when I was 21. And actually this Friday, I'll be turning 34.
Wow, happy early birthday.
Yeah, thank you. I've just been in the industry for a while, and I've seen a lot of change in the industry, and I've focused on the things that I think matter the most. And really, for me, what that comes down to, what that boils down to, is what I call the highest probability of the deepest transformation. So what that means is when I create something or when I work with someone, when I take some type of action, the lens that I look through or the filter that I work through is this thing going to create the highest probability of the deepest transformation? And because that's a fairly tight filter, it massively regulates how I see things and how I do things. So it allows me to create truly extraordinary results for my clients, and it saves me a lot of time because I don't have to worry about focusing on things that honestly won't move the needle forward. You know how people get kind of caught up with busy work.
Definitely.
So it's very liberating in that way. That's kind of my focus. At this point in time, my focus is on working with what I call visionary leaders to help them change the world by doing the impossible. And the reason that I think it's important to change the world by doing the impossible is because of a story from a guy named Roger Bannister, who, for those of you who don't know, is the guy who broke the 4-minute mile. So everyone believed that it was impossible to run a 4-minute mile, and he believed that it was possible until one day he finally did it. And the interesting thing that happened was that same year, I believe 6 other people did it purely because they believed something was possible that they had previously thought was impossible. So there's some magic in that. There's a metaphor, which is essentially when you show the world that something is possible that they believe is impossible, it changes their potential. It changes what they believe is possible for themselves as well. Not just what they believe is possible for someone else, but for themselves. And so the world that I envision is one where people are constantly doing the impossible and igniting others to go do their impossible, and then they go do their impossible, and that ignites other people to go do their impossible, and it just becomes this kind of exponential, transformational cycle.
Yeah, beautiful ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like, please continue, go ahead.
You know, I find that doing the impossible is also important because of who you must become in order to do it. Right? You have to go beyond who you've been in order to do the impossible. Einstein said we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So it causes us as leaders, it causes us as entrepreneurs to elevate, to evolve, to revolutionize ourselves, which I think is just great as well, because again, that goes back to the human potential thing, like how far can we really go and what's necessary to help bring out the best in people. Well, I find when people are faced with impossible challenges, it truly brings out the best in them.
100%. And a trite or a smaller example of that might be for those of you who are fans of the American Ninja Warrior show, right? They have these obstacles. They have these incredible obstacles, and they change the course each season, and they make it more and more difficult. And it only takes that one person to achieve the one element of the course to almost not give permission, but give permission in a sense, or at least give hope that others can do it as well. That's
right. It's really just an awakening of potential.
I love that. So how
it's an awakening of potential.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. How does that fit in to what we had started on and touched upon? How does using one's imagination, and then what do you mean by that? And then patterns of excellence. Is that 2 phrases, or is it all one phrase? Tell me more about that.
Two very different things. So using your imagination is one thing, and personal patterns of excellence is another thing. Personal patterns of excellence is a science. It's an art and a science that I created about 8 years ago. So we'll talk about that, but we'll talk about imagination first. Imagination is one of the most critical components to life, I would say. And I know that's a bold statement, but if you think of it like this, young children tend to believe that anything is possible before they get kind of infected with these negative beliefs that they're not good enough or they can't or whatever. it just tends to be our default that we think we can do anything. You know, and if you ask a 2-year-old that wants a cookie before dinner, if it's logical, you know, you can't argue with them. You cannot have a logical argument with a 2-year-old that wants a cookie. They want the cookie because they want the cookie. Right? And you can give them the most simple toy. This is actually a phenomenon called functional fixedness. Functional fixedness, which is essentially the ability to see something for only what it is rather than what it could be. So, for example, people who have high levels of functional fixedness, they look at a hammer and all they see is a hammer. But if you give a hammer to a child, that hammer could be anything. It could be a rocket ship. It could be a boat. It could be a gun. It could be a horse. It could be a car. It could be a telescope. It could be anything. Right? So children typically have very, very low levels of functional fixedness. So their happiness is partially dependent on their imagination. They can just imagine worlds for themselves. Think about, you ever seen like a little kid out in public that's maybe like wearing a Superman cape, or a little girl that's wearing a tutu, or like a tiara or something, right? Like a princess crown, or like they just live in their own worlds. And they're happier because of it. It's when we start to let go of that emotion, it's when we begin to let go of that imagination and quote unquote feel like we have to grow up, that starts to get us in trouble. Now, here's the funny part, is that, you know, we're kids and we play and we have this imagination and life is good, and then we kind of feel like, okay, now it's time to grow up, and we don't use our imagination so much. But our imagination is important for 2 reasons. Number one, because if you have a great imagination, it makes it much easier to be happy. I find that at the end of the day, what most people want is not cars, is not money, is not fame, is not fortune. They just want to be happy. Because you and I both know plenty of people that have plenty of money and cars and houses, and they're not happy.
That is correct.
So they're not. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, hey, if you get all the money and the cars, then you'll be happy. Yes, sometimes it does make people happy. I won't say that it doesn't, because my life has improved because of some of the things that I've gotten. So I can be honest about that. However, I've been at the lowest of the low. I've been homeless in New York City, and I was still happy. Because no matter how bad things got, all I needed to do was just use my imagination a little bit to think about, where's the silver lining? What's the good in this? What could I be grateful for? How is this the lesson? Right? But when you're in the moment and it's tough, if you're not willing to exercise that imagination just a little bit, it's hard to see the silver lining. So that's part one. I believe that imagination is critical to happiness, because if you don't have your imagination, it's hard to see the silver lining. It's hard to be grateful. Like, you know, I've met people who are really feel like life has been harsh on them, and they're kind of in this victim mentality, and everything has to be hard and a struggle. And I'll say, okay, well, you know, what's just one thing that you're grateful for? And sometimes they'll have a hard time figuring out just one thing. Just one thing. And for the people who are extremely grateful, it could be something as simple as like the sun shining on their face. Right? So it just takes a little bit of imagination to get to that level. And yet, if you can exercise that little bit of imagination to figure out just one thing that you could be grateful for right now if you really wanted to, then you creatively come up with this amazing, these amazing thoughts. So that's part one. And part two is, like I said, or like Einstein said, you cannot solve your problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So in your work, whatever your work is, especially in my work, in order to do the impossible, you have to be creative. You have to be creative. You cannot use the same tools, ideas, strategies as before, but you can use the same imagination, right? What got you here might not get you there as far as the specific tool, but what got you here will get you there as far as imagination, because the imagination is unlimited. Right? Knowledge is finite and imagination is unlimited. Einstein also said that. I'm a big Einstein fan, if you can't tell.
I can't tell that at all.
But it's totally true. I find that whether people are trying to do the impossible or they're in just what they would consider impossible situations, your imagination, your creativity is what gets you out of it. It's what allows you to think at a different level. And so I just find that it's so powerful to be able to utilize that imagination. And I find that it is by far one of the most underutilized assets of most people. Most people. And yeah, so I think really that's kind of like the majority of what I'd have to say about imagination, is that it's helpful in so many ways. It can help you be happy, and it can help you be successful, because in life you're going to face challenges, whether you impose them onto yourself, how do we do the impossible, or whether life puts them on you, right? You're going to grow either way. It's just you get to choose how it happens, and sometimes you don't get to choose. Sometimes life just shows up with a challenge. That's just life. Those are just the rules. I didn't make them, but I can certainly play by them. Mm-hmm. And so when challenges show up in life, if you're willing to be nimble, if you're willing to be creative and use your imagination, then you can think yourself into or out of any situation, rather than being stuck, having that functional fixedness and going, wow, this is just what it is. You hear that phrase a lot these days, don't you? It is what it is. Well, what a trapped mentality that is. Talk about functional fixedness. It is what it is. Well, why? Why does it have to be what it is? Why can't it be something else? Again, it's that mindset, right? So exactly. Imagination's so powerful. Whether you're getting through challenges of life or helping yourself be happy, or you're taking on the impossible, your imagination can help you do it.
So any ideas that you can offer up in terms of how someone could ignite their imagination? Yep.
I do, so most people will sit and meditate, let's just say for 30 minutes. Okay, so I do two versions of using my imagination. I do one that's a ritual, and I do one that's more fluid. So let me explain what I mean by that. Just like how most people will sit and meditate for 30 minutes, and ideally they either think of some intention or they try to just clear their mind completely, and they just sit for 30 minutes. And I think that's a great practice. And I think people should equally sit for 30 minutes and just use their imagination. So, for example, I do an exercise where I'll sit and I'll imagine the ocean. And I'll just sit and I'll think about the ocean. I'll envision the ocean. How clear is the picture? How crisp is it? Can you hear any sounds? What else do you see? Are there birds? Is there an island off in the distance? Then I'll imagine a ship. Then I will rotate the ship. Just like a camera view. I'll take the camera and I'll rotate it from the front of the ship to the side, to the back, and then I'll make the ocean disappear. And now the ship is just floating. Now I'll take the camera and I'll go underneath the ship, and then I'll rotate it all the way on top of the ship, and then I'll explode the ship into bubbles. Now there's just bubbles, right? So I just play. I'm just a kid. I just have fun. I have a little bit of a structure for what that quote unquote imagination meditation looks like, but sometimes I just am spontaneous and I just have fun with it. So I kind of have a structure with it up to a point, and then I just have fun with it. I just play with it. But it's a ritual because I take time out to do it specifically. Just like people take time out to brush their teeth or to exercise or to meditate, right? It's like, hey, at 12 o'clock, that's my time to exercise. It's like, well, great. At 3 o'clock, that's my time to use my imagination.
Right, yeah. And that's building in a schedule for yourself.
Yeah, building a schedule. I find that the quality of your life, as Tony would say, comes down to the quality of your rituals. And if the imagination is one of the most valuable assets that is equally the most underutilized, it kind of boggles my mind to say that. Let's just pause for a second. It kind of boggles my mind to say those words in the same sentence. It is one of the greatest assets that you have, and it is one of the simultaneously greatest underutilized assets that most people have. That's kind of sad, right? Yeah. And I know that I'm not immune. You know, I have a business, I have a life, things happen. So if I don't go out of my way to use my imagination, in the past, it wouldn't happen. So I went out of my way to make sure that it happened. And my life benefited as a result, my business, my clients, everybody wins as a result of me nurturing this imagination. And it happened so much so, I enjoyed the process so much so, that I created what I call fluid time, which is using your imagination in fluid time, real time. You're walking down the street, and as you're walking, you kind of like transpose, almost like, remember when you were in school and they would do like the projector and they would put the math problems up there and things like that? What was that called? Mm-hmm. like an overlay. I can't remember what they call it, but
I know what you're talking about. Though they have the dry erase marker or something on that piece of plastic. Yeah,
exactly. So essentially, like you can take whatever you see through your eyes and you put that down on the projector, and that's what gets projected. But then you can take your magic marker and you can draw whatever you want on it. So like, for example, when I'm walking down the street or if I'm driving, I'll see everything, but then I'll also just use my imagination. I'll maybe pretend that I'm driving through space. Or while I'm walking down the street, maybe the sidewalk is a really long bridge. Or maybe there's kind of some like friendly, kind of like Dr. Seuss type animal kind of like peeking around the building or something. Like, who knows, right? I just have fun with it. But I allow it to come out. I allow it to come play. And I find that it makes such a difference because in my work, I really, truly am faced with some pretty challenging questions. And I find that because I'm exercising that imagination so much that I can come up with really powerful answers relatively quickly, simply because that imagination muscle is always getting worked.
Mm-hmm.
So
but it's not using your imagination. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just using your imagination. You know, if a CEO of a company is listening to this interview right now, using your imagination could seem pretty silly and unproductive, but I concur with you. It's actually super productive to be able to build that imagination muscle. It does allow for creativity to come in, solutions to come in. And the solutions that come in are not far-fetched just because they came from an imagination. It's a viable option that someone can take, that solution that's produced through the imagination, correct?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, right?
It's not about like creating harebrained ideas. And for the people who are listening that are, would consider themselves more practical, you can use your imagination just to visualize things. like the company that you want to run, or the movement that you want to lead, or the difference or the impact that you want to make in the world. You can visualize, you can use your imagination for those things too.
Right. Elite athletes use their imagination and visualization all of the time. Our Olympians use their imagination and visualization all the time in order to be able to see themselves as a champion. And they, MMA fighters, they visualize raising their hands at the end of the fight and to be a winner. And so, it absolutely works.
Totally. Yeah. And they've, in the athletic community, because that's a pretty big part of my background, they've done studies on people, on athletes, whether it's basketball or MMA or golf or whatever, people who visualize compared to people who don't win more. They just win more. So there's something to it, right? So it's like, personally, I just think that having fun with your visualization and not necessarily making it about winning, I think it's good because it just brings people back to a more childlike state. Mm-hmm. Because you see me walking down the street and I'm just having fun because I'm just in my own world, and that improves my quality of life. And so therefore, I'm just a better version of myself. And so when I show up to my work for my clients, I'm a better person. To my fiance, to my family, to everybody, they just get a better version of me. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, I do some visualization as well. However, it's not hard for me to visualize the things that I am either working towards or want to achieve or what have you, because that imagination gets so much exercise all the time. When I do think about the more like quote unquote practical stuff, it's really easy. So yeah, I just think there's so many benefits.
And there are, and even when watching, so I don't watch a lot of television. I know I mentioned Ninja Warrior there. That is a show that I do enjoy. I also enjoy MMA. And so when I watch those shows, or The Ultimate Fighter, commercials will come on, and to the fluid, using your imagination in a fluid time. Yep. My husband and I, we just started this, I would say about 4 or 5 nights ago, where when prescription commercials come on, you hear the laundry list of what can go wrong while taking the medication. So we decided to mute all of the commercials, because the commercial images are actually beautiful, and they're loving, and they're couples, and so we started ad-libbing.
That are running through a field and things like that.
Right. And so we started ad-libbing our own story to it versus listening to the story that was being given to us by the pharmaceutical and consumer market. And so it does make you feel better, because if you're not cognizant of what you're consuming throughout the day, that what you are consuming is what is being pushed out. And to your advice and your expertise here with the fluidity and using your imagination, if you can apply it throughout the day, you do become happier. You're not taking on someone else's garbage or baggage or crap, if you will. You're creating your own world, and what you're creating actually comes to fruition. I love that.
Right. And I think you really hit a nerve here, Tam. I want to take things kind of to the next level.
Okay.
Ultimately, what we're talking about is freedom. Mm-hmm. Really, if you really think about it, what we're talking about is freedom. Because if you ask people like, hey, how often do you want to be happy? What would most people say? Like, all the time, right? Or as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I find that freedom, or, happiness is really just kind of like a derivative of freedom. It's a choice. It's a choice. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you can watch the commercial and you can listen to all the negative side effects and kind of like be influenced by that. But you exercised your ability to choose by muting it. Right? Like, you get into a tough situation, some crisis happens, and you choose how you're going to react to it, rather than just reacting out of fear or what have you. Right, so ultimately what I think we're talking about is exercising choice. I'm going to choose to exercise my imagination and my ability to decide how I'm going to feel I want to feel good during these commercials, so I'm going to decide to, A, mute the TV, and B, make these funny ad libs so that it's like really empowering and awesome.
Mhm.
Right? How cool is that? So
it's wicked cool.
so yeah, for like, you know, if there's any kind of more like hardcore CEO type people listening, it's really about freedom. It's really about exercising choice, and that is massively empowering, not only for you but for anybody else that's involved in what you do. So I think that's really the macro vision of what it really is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Shannon, I cannot believe that our time is already up. And again, I still just feel like we're scratching the surface here. So I might ask for permission to have you back at some point later on down the road. And I would love that if you'd be willing and game.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you again for your time today. And I look forward to sharing this, not just today, but beyond, because I really do feel like there's some really juicy golden nuggets here. How can people find you? Where do they go to search you, Shannon?
You know, the best way to connect with me is just my personal page on Facebook.
Excellent, and I'll include that link in the write-up, guys, with the podcast itself. It's been a pleasure. You've got my creative juices flowing, and I love it. So I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And before we hang up, there are a few other folks that I do need to thank, and they include Karen D. Felice from Karen D. Felice Designs. These are our supporters and our friends of Calling the Real You podcast, everyone. So if you have an opportunity to go to their sites, that would be greatly appreciated. I also like to thank Jim Oliver, who's the music is provided by him, and the beginning and the end of the show, Yolanta Bremer of Yola Portraits, and of course Reverend Patricia Brooks, because without her and Sacred Stories platform, Calling the Real You podcast would not be a possibility, and just massive gratitude for everybody. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Shannon, have a great day. Thank you.